Welcome, dear readers and listeners, to this journey through time and the human heart. Prepare to meet Clara, a young seamstress whose destiny will be intertwined with nobility and loneliness, in an era where love needed to be woven with the same delicate threads that embroidered her mended dresses. This is a story about silent dignity, about impossible choices, and about how a cold agreement can blossom into the most unexpected spring of the heart. In 1878, on a farm lost between forgotten mountains and valleys, an absurd proposal would forever change the life of a humble seamstress. A powerful man, marked by illness and loneliness, would offer her everything she didn't have, in exchange for the unthinkable. But sometimes fate weaves its finest lace precisely in the places where we least expect to find beauty. This story makes us reflect. How far would we go for the love of those who depend on us? And can agreements born of necessity transform into true love? And you accompanying me right now, where are you watching from? Leave your city in the comments. I want to know where the hearts that beat along with this story come from. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Your presence here fuels these narratives and helps me continue bringing stories that touch the soul. Year 1878. Location: São Miguel Valley, Valente Farm. The dawn in Alintos was always born with the smell of damp earth and wild lavender. Clara would wake before the sun touched the irregular tiles of the small adobe house, when the world still held the night's secrets within its folds of mist. Her 20 years carried the serenity of one who had learned early that life did not distribute its graces fairly, but it also did not steal the dignity of those who knew how to sew their own history with thread and needle. Her fingers, calloused and precise, moved over the fabric like someone praying a silent prayer. Each stitch was a promise of survival, each knot a small victory against the hunger that lurked at the edges of her existence. The dress she was mending belonged to Mrs. Mariana from the big house to the north and needed to be ready before Sunday. Clara looked through the fogged window as she worked, watching the chickens peck in the yard where cabbage and pumpkins, planted with her own hands, also grew. From the back room, a hoarse cough broke the silence. Clara dropped her sewing and walked barefoot across the packed earth floor. Aunt Mercedes was sitting up in bed, her face as pale as the faded curtains, bringing a handkerchief to her lips. At 56, Mercedes looked twice her age. The illness consuming her had no certain name in the words of the traveling doctor who had passed through the village months ago, but it had a price. The medicines cost more than Clara could earn in 3 months of sewing. "Don't get up yet, Auntie," Clara whispered, adjusting the blanket over the shoulders of the woman who had raised her since she was 7, when cholera took her parents in a single summer week. Mercedes touched her niece's face with trembling fingers, and in that gesture was all the love that words didn't need to say. The morning followed its course of small rituals. Clara prepared mint tea, cut thin slices of bread that needed to last the whole week, fed the chickens, watered the garden. Her brown hair, tied in a simple braid, swung as she moved between tasks. Sometimes she looked at the main road that passed in front of the house, seeing carts go up and down the valley, carrying lives that seemed as distant to her as stars. In the afternoon, when the golden light entered through the cracks and turned the dust into small dancing constellations, Clara resumed her sewing. Her eyes, brown and deep, had that special quality of someone who had learned to see beauty even in broken things. Mercedes, who had been a children's teacher before her illness, had taught her letters and numbers. It was a rare privilege for someone of her condition, and Clara guarded this treasure like one guards precious seeds. But as the needle pierced the fabric, a dark thought crossed her mind like a cloud over the sun. Mercedes' medications were running out. In a week, maybe 2, there would be nothing left to alleviate the cough that bled, the fever that burned. And Clara, no matter how her fingers flew over the cloths, no matter how many temporary jobs she accepted on neighboring farms, knew it wouldn't be enough. Life is an imperfect seam, she thought, where the threads break just when we most need them to hold firm. That night, Clara wrote a few lines in the worn notebook she kept under her mattress. Mercedes had once told her that writing was a way of not letting the soul rot in silence. And Clara wrote about fear, about powerlessness, about how hard it was to be strong when everything around her was collapsing like an adobe house in heavy rain. Outside, the wind blew from the north, bringing the distant scent of the Valente farmlands. Clara couldn't imagine that, from that direction, the winds that would change her destiny in ways she could never predict would also blow. What she didn't know was that in less than a week, an impossible proposal would knock on her door. and nothing would ever be the same again. Dom Augusto Valente walked alone through the stone corridors of his big house. It was almost 10 o'clock at night, and the silence of the property had that heavy quality of places where laughter had forgotten how to sound. His footsteps echoed against walls that had already witnessed generations of Valentes, men of broad shoulders and rigid principles, who built their fortune with hard work and implacable honesty. At 42, Augusto carried the invisible weight of a life half-lived. His dark hair, generously sprinkled with grey strands, framed a face with lines marked by time and melancholy. Tall, with broad shoulders that work on the farm kept strong, he always wore dark colours, as if the mourning for his wife, who died 5 years earlier, was a second skin he couldn't shed, Carmela. The name still echoed in his mind like a distant bell. An arranged marriage, a union of farms and surnames convenient for both families. They lived as polite strangers under the same roof, sharing meals and silences, but never truly sharing a life. When typhoid fever took her, Augusto felt only emptiness filling another void, as if nothing had really changed. No children. The word haunted him like a ghost. No heirs for these lands his grandparents had cleared, for this house that held so many stories in its dark wooden beams. His distant cousin, Rodolfo Valente, waited like a patient vulture. Everyone knew his reputation, a compulsive gambler, cruel to employees, drowned in debts he inherited from his equally irresponsible father. Augusto stopped before the office window, looking out at the valley that stretched under the silver moonlight. The Valente farm was the largest and most prosperous in the region. His workers were treated fairly, received decent wages, had decent homes. All this would disappear when Rodolfo took over. The man would sell everything in months to pay off gambling debts, but there was something more urgent haunting him. 3 weeks ago, Dr. Henrique Tavares, from the neighboring city, confirmed what Augusto already suspected from the symptoms: incurable liver disease, 8 to 10 months to live, maybe a little more if he was lucky. His skin was beginning to yellow subtly. His hands trembled at the end of the day. Fatigue was constant. It was then that the idea was born, terrible and practical at the same time. He needed an heir, but he didn't have time for traditional courtship, for the years a conventional marriage would take. He needed someone who understood that this would be a transaction, but who also had the necessary dignity and kindness to raise a child with love. For weeks, he had discreetly observed the women of the valley. He didn't want someone from his own social class, as they would come with expectations, with complicated families, with demands he couldn't meet. He wanted someone who understood that this was different. And then he saw Clara. It had been in April, when he hired her temporarily to help in the kitchen during the barn repairs. He had watched how she worked, silent and efficient, how she treated the other employees with simple respect, how her eyes observed everything with a quiet intelligence. One day he surprised her reading a paper that Donna Eulalia, the housekeeper, had left on the table. Clara not only deciphered the words, but she understood them. A seamstress who could read. Rare, precious. In the following days, he made discreet inquiries. He learned of the sick aunt, the financial difficulties, Clara's unwavering honesty. He learned that she would never accept charity, but might accept an agreement if it was presented with clarity and fairness. Augusto sat back down at the mahogany desk, picked up the pen and the family-crested letterhead. He wrote the letter with a firm hand, despite the tremor that was already beginning to settle in his fingers. There was no time for doubts. Death was riding, and he needed to leave a legacy that wasn't the destruction of everything his family had built. He sealed the letter, called his trusted messenger. "Take this to Miss Clara's house at the entrance to Alentos, and wait for a response." As the horse galloped into the night, Augusto looked out at the valley again. He knew what he was about to propose was extraordinary, perhaps cruel in its brutal honesty. But he also knew that sometimes life demanded we be practical even when the heart wished only to be romantic. And so, under the cold May moonlight, a letter crossed the distance between two worlds that should never have touched. But that fate insisted on intertwining. The letter arrived on a late May morning, when the dew still sparkled on the leaves of the small garden. Clara heard the sound of hooves before she saw the horse. Her heart tightened, as it always did when something unexpected appeared on the predictable horizon of her days. The messenger was young, with the discreet but well-kept uniform of the Valente farm employees. He handed her an envelope of heavy cream paper, sealed with red wax where an intertwined V was engraved. Clara held the object like one holds a wounded bird, not knowing whether to stroke it or let it fly away. "You must give an answer by noon tomorrow, miss," the messenger said politely. "Dom Augusto requests an audience if you accept." When the horse was gone, Clara sat at the kitchen table, her hands trembling slightly as she opened the envelope. The handwriting was firm, elegant, the words chosen with care. Dom Augusto Valente respectfully requested her presence at the farm the next day, at noon, for a conversation of a private and urgent nature. Nothing more. Mercedes, sitting in the rocking chair near the window, watched her niece with eyes still sharp despite the illness. "What does the master of the farm want with you, child?" "I don't know, Auntie, but I'm going to find out." The night that followed was long. Clara tossed and turned in bed, trying to imagine what matter could be so urgent. Maybe he wanted to order special embroidery, or maybe there was a problem with the work she had done months ago. But something in the formal tone of the letter suggested it was more than that. The next day, Clara put on her best dress, the navy blue one Mercedes had sewn for her 2 years before. She combed her hair carefully, tying it in a simple bun. When she looked in the small cracked mirror on the wall, she saw what she always saw: an ordinary young woman with a delicate face, but no striking beauty. Eyes that held more thoughts than they let show. The walk to the farm took 40 minutes. Clara climbed the dirt path, observing how the landscape changed, becoming greener, more cared for. The big house appeared at the top of the hill, like a stone ship anchored in a sea of cultivated fields. It was imposing without being ostentatious, solid as the mountains behind it. Donna Eulalia, the housekeeper with white hair in a severe bun, received her at the entrance. "Miss Clara, Dom Augusto is waiting for you in the office. This way." The corridors smelled of beeswax and old wood. Clara followed the housekeeper, her simple shoes making soft sounds on the floor. When they reached a dark oak door, Eulalia knocked lightly and opened it. Dom Augusto Valente was standing by the window, looking out at the valley. When he turned, Clara could see clearly what she had only intuited months before. He was ill. His skin had a subtly yellowish tone. The dark circles under his eyes showed deep fatigue, and there was an almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. "Miss Clara, thank you for coming," he said, his voice deep but gentle. He indicated a high-backed chair. "Please sit down. What I'm about to say will require you to be comfortable." Clara sat, her hands crossed in her lap, her heart beating like a trapped bird. Augusto sat behind the desk, studied her for a moment with those grey eyes that seemed to weigh souls. "I will be direct, as time does not allow me subtleties," he began. "I am dying. Liver disease. Incurable. I have 8 to 10 months, according to Dr. Tavares, and I have no heirs." Clara felt the air leave her lungs but remained motionless, just listening. "My cousin Rodolfo will inherit everything when I die. He is a cruel, indebted man who will destroy in months what my family built over generations. The workers on this farm, the families who depend on these lands, everyone will suffer." Augusto paused, the next words clearly difficult. "Therefore, I have come to make you a proposal that, I fully understand, will sound absurd and possibly offensive." The silence in the room was so thick, Clara could hear the ticking of the wall clock. "I would like you to marry me. I would like you to give me a child, a legitimate heir who can inherit these lands and protect them. In return, I guarantee you lifelong financial security, a dignified home, and complete medical care for your Aunt Mercedes." He looked directly into her eyes. "I know this is not a marriage in the traditional sense. It will be an agreement, honest in its transactional nature. But it will be legal, registered, and will protect you and the child forever." Clara felt as if the floor had disappeared from under her feet. Her mind was spinning, trying to process words that seemed to come from a fever dream. Marriage, child, agreement. The words danced in her head without finding a place to land. "Why me?" she managed to ask, her voice just a whisper. "I observed many women in the valley in recent weeks. I was looking for someone with genuine kindness, honesty, a capacity for hard work, someone who could raise a child with true love, not with the coldness of social obligations." He leaned forward slightly. "And then I saw that you know how to read. That told me you are intelligent, that you can learn, that you can one day manage these lands when the boy is still too young." The boy. He already assumed it would be a boy. I need to think," Clara managed to articulate, feeling as if she were drowning in air. "I understand completely. Take all the time you need." Augusto picked up a paper from the desk. "Here are the detailed terms, in writing. Take it. Show it to your aunt if you wish. But I ask that you give me an answer in 1 week. Time, unfortunately, is a luxury I do not possess." Clara took the paper with hands that were now visibly trembling. She stood up, feeling her legs unsteady, and walked toward the door. "Miss Clara," Augusto's voice stopped her before she left. She turned. His eyes held something she didn't expect to see, a deep sadness, almost an apology. "I know this isn't fair, but life rarely is, and I am trying to do the best I can with the little I have left." Clara nodded slightly and left, crossing the corridors that now seemed endless. Only when she was back on the road, with the wind blowing on her face, did she allow the tears to come. An impossible proposal, a marriage without love, a child conceived as a solution. And she, Clara, a humble seamstress who could barely buy medicine for her aunt, now held in her hands the paper that could change everything or destroy her soul in ways that gold could never repair. Clara didn't tell Mercedes about the proposal right away. How could she? How could she explain that one of the most respected men in the valley had just offered her marriage not for love, but as a cold transaction to produce an heir? For the next 3 days, Clara lived in a state of silent agony. She continued with her tasks, sewed the dresses, fed the chickens, prepared the meals, but her mind was a constant whirlwind of thoughts that violently contradicted each other. "This is absurd, degrading. He wants to use me as a rented womb." But then she would look at Mercedes, paler each day, each cough deeper, and think, but this could save her. The medicines, real doctors, a life without constant hunger haunting our door. At night, lying in her bed, Clara would look at the dark ceiling and let the tears run silently. She thought of her dignity, of what her parents would say if they could see her considering such a proposal. But she also thought of how many times Mercedes had given up everything to raise her, to teach her, to give her love when the world only offered orphanhood. It's humiliating, but so is hunger. So is a slow death from lack of medicine. On the 3rd day, Mercedes had a violent crisis. Clara was in the kitchen when she heard the sound of something falling in the bedroom. She ran and found her aunt on the floor, the handkerchief stained with fresh blood, her body trembling uncontrollably. Mercedes's face was livid, her lips bluish, her eyes wide with terror. "Auntie, Auntie!" Clara cried, lifting her with difficulty, laying her back on the bed. Mercedes's hands gripped hers with desperate strength, trying to breathe but producing only choked sounds. It was in that moment, with the blood staining her hands, with the fear of real and immediate death before her, that Clara made her decision. There was no luxury of dignity when the life of someone you loved was at stake. There was no room for pride when the alternative was to watch Mercedes die slowly, drowning in her own blood, while she, Clara, held in her hands the possibility of saving her. When Mercedes was finally able to breathe again, when the crisis passed and she fell into an exhausted sleep, Clara went out into the cold night. She sat on the steps of the small adobe house, looking at the stars that shone indifferently to human suffering. She remembered something Mercedes had told her years ago. "Child, life confronts us with choices where there is no good option. There is only the least bad choice, and there is no shame in choosing to survive, as long as you keep your heart clean." Clara picked up the paper Augusto had given her, read it again by the faint light of the lamp. The terms were clear, almost cruelly honest. Legal and registered marriage, respectful cohabitation until conception. After the birth of the heir, Clara would have total financial autonomy, a house on the property, a lifelong income. Mercedes would receive the best medical care available. The child would be raised with love and would have all the privileges of the Valente family. There were no promises of love, no false romanticism, just an agreement between two people desperate for different reasons. The next morning, Clara put on the navy blue dress again, combed her hair and walked to the Valente farm. Donna Eulalia received her with the same discreet professionalism and led her back to the office. Dom Augusto was seated, but stood up when she entered. His grey eyes studied her, and Clara saw that he already knew what the answer would be. "I accept your proposal, Dom Augusto," Clara said, her voice firm despite her racing heart. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "I want the best available doctor to examine my Aunt Mercedes immediately, not after the wedding. Immediately. It will be done today. I want her to live on the property, near me, where I can take care of her and she of me when the child is born. There is a small cottage at the back near the herb gardens, comfortable and private. It will be hers." Clara took a deep breath for the last condition, the one that mattered most to her soul. "And I want access to your books. I want to continue learning. I want to be able to read." For the first time, something that might have been a smile lightly touched Augusto's lips. "The library is yours. All the books, whenever you wish." They looked at each other for a long moment, two strangers about to become husband and wife in the strangest way possible. Clara saw that sadness in his eyes again, but she also saw something else: respect. "Then it is agreed," said Augusto. "The wedding will be next week, discreet, with only the necessary witnesses. And Miss Clara—" He paused. "I am sorry that the circumstances are these. You deserved a real wedding, with love and flowers." Clara felt tears burn her eyes, but did not let them fall. "Life rarely gives us what we deserve, Dom Augusto. It just gives us what it gives, and it's up to us to decide what to do with it." And so, on a May morning that smelled of lavender and damp earth, a deal was sealed. There was no kiss, no ring, no promises of eternal love. Just two people trying to survive the cruel blows of fate in the only way they had left, together, but fundamentally lonely in their reasons. The week leading up to the wedding passed like a mist over water. Clara could hardly believe the reality of what was about to happen. Sometimes she woke up at night, her heart racing, thinking it was all just a fever dream. But then she saw her few clothes already packed in the wooden chest, and she knew it was real. Mercedes, after a detailed examination by Dr. Tavares, had begun a treatment with imported medicines that cost more than Clara would earn in an entire year of sewing. The aunt was visibly improving every day, the cough lessening, her strength returning, but her eyes when she looked at her niece were filled with worry. "Child, are you sure about this?" she had asked the night before the wedding, holding Clara's hands in hers. "I'm sure it's what needs to be done, Auntie. Whether it's what I want, that's another story, but wanting doesn't always matter." The wedding was set for the morning of a Thursday in early June. Clara woke up early, bathed in the basin of cold water, and put on the same navy blue dress she had worn to the previous meetings. There was no white dress, no veil, no illusions of romantic purity. It was just a blue dress that already knew the shape of her body and had witnessed her tears. The ceremony would be in the small chapel of San Miguel, the same one where Clara had been baptized as a child. Donna Eulalia came to pick her up in a simple carriage. Mercedes, still weak but determined, went along. The chapel was small, with whitewashed walls and images of saints faded by time. When Clara entered, she saw there were only 4 people waiting. Dom Augusto, dressed in a dark suit that further accentuated his growing pallor, Father Mateus, old and half-deaf, Sebastião, the farm's foreman, a middle-aged man with a sun-weathered face and kind eyes, and the village notary who would be the second witness. There were no flowers, no music, no guests filling the creaking wooden pews, just the heavy silence of a ceremony that was more contract than celebration. Clara walked down the central aisle with steps that echoed against the cold stones. Mercedes stayed in the back pews, hands clasped in silent prayer. When Clara reached the altar, Augusto offered her his hand. It was the first time they had touched. His hand was large, calloused from work, but the touch was gentle, almost hesitant. Father Mateus began the ceremony in the monotonous voice of someone who had performed this ritual hundreds of times. Clara heard the words as if from a great distance underwater, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health. The traditional phrases sounded absurdly ironic given the circumstances. When it came time for the vows, Augusto answered with a firm voice, "I do." Clara answered too, but her voice came out as a whisper, "I do." There was no kiss. The priest declared them husband and wife, made the sign of the cross, and the ceremony was over in less than 15 minutes. They signed the documents in the sacristy, the pens scratching the paper with sounds that seemed like screams in the silence. When they left the chapel, the sun was high and relentless. Clara blinked against the light, feeling strangely empty. She was married. She was now Clara Valente, mistress of the largest farm in the valley. And yet she felt exactly the same as the humble seamstress who had entered that chapel half an hour earlier. The journey to the farm was silent. Mercedes returned to the small cottage that had already been prepared for her, near the herb gardens as promised. Clara was taken to her new quarters on the second floor of the big house. The room was spacious, with dark wood furniture and a 4-poster bed covered with a white embroidered bedspread. The window overlooked the valley, offering a view that stretched to the bluish mountains on the horizon. There was a small desk, a wardrobe, and a door that led to a private bathroom, a luxury Clara had never imagined having. Donna Eulalia showed her where things were, always polite, but maintaining a professional distance. "Dinner will be served at 7 o'clock, madam. Dom Augusto dines in the main dining room." Madam. The word sounded strange, like clothes that didn't fit. Clara was left alone, sat on the edge of the bed, which creaked softly under her weight. She looked at her own hands, still the same calloused hands as always, but now wearing a simple gold ring that Augusto had placed on her finger during the ceremony. So this is it, she thought. I am a married woman, and yet I have never felt so single in my life. At night, there was the silent dinner. Clara and Augusto sat at opposite ends of a long table, eating food that Clara could barely taste. The silverware made metallic sounds that seemed excessively loud in the stillness. Later, when the night was advanced, Augusto knocked on the door of Clara's room. She opened it, her heart hammering. He was in a dark robe, his face even paler in the dim light of the lamp he carried. "May I come in?" he asked, and there was something almost shy in his voice. Clara nodded, stepped aside. What followed was mechanical, respectful, but devoid of tenderness. Two bodies fulfilling an agreement. Two strangers trying to create life without the spark that usually accompanies such an act. When it was over, Augusto kissed her forehead lightly and whispered, "Forgive me." Then he left, leaving Clara alone in the darkness, feeling simultaneously changed and exactly the same. And so began the strange marriage of Clara and Augusto Valente, a union born not of the heart, but of necessity, not of desire, but of duty. But sometimes, the most unlikely seeds are the ones that bloom in the most unexpected gardens. The first days as Senora Valente passed in a fog of strangeness. Clara would wake up in the spacious room, still expecting to see the adobe walls of the small house in Alintos, and it would take her a few seconds to remember where she was. Reality would arrive slowly, like cold water running down her spine. She was married, living in a big house, the wife of a man she barely knew. Meals continued to be silent events. Augusto had breakfast early, even before the sun had fully risen, while Clara preferred to wake up a little later. Lunches were quick, as he always had farm matters to attend to. Only at dinner did they meet, sitting at that long table with Donna Eulalia serving dishes Clara had never imagined eating. At night, Augusto visited her room with clinical regularity. They were silent, polite encounters, completely devoid of romance. Clara would close her eyes and think of other things, trying not to feel the humiliation that burned in her chest. He was gentle, within the bounds of possibility, but there were no illusions about what it was, a means to an end. During the days, Clara shyly explored her new domains. The big house had 15 rooms, corridors that smelled of old wood and wax, stairs that creaked in specific places she soon learned to identify. The maids treated her with formal but distant respect, clearly confused about who exactly this young seamstress was, who had suddenly become the mistress of the house. Mercedes was improving remarkably. Clara visited her every day in the cottage out back, where her aunt spent afternoons reading books Augusto had generously lent, or sewing in the sunny mornings. "Are you all right, child?" she would always ask, her eyes studying her niece's face for signs of suffering. Clara would smile and lie, "I'm fine, Auntie, I'm learning." And indeed she was. One June afternoon, while wandering the house, Clara discovered the library. It was at the far west end of the building, a large room with floor-to-ceiling shelves full of leather-bound volumes. Light entered through two tall windows, creating golden beams where dust danced. Clara entered, as one enters a temple. Her fingers slid over the spines of the books, reading titles in Portuguese, Spanish, some in French she didn't understand. There were books of poetry, novels, treatises on agriculture, volumes of history. It was a treasure she had never imagined she could touch. She chose a volume of poetry and sat in an armchair near the window. The words on the paper were like music, evoking images of distant places and feelings she recognized but had never known how to name. She was so absorbed that she didn't hear Augusto enter. "Do you like poetry?" His voice made her start, almost dropping the book. I'm sorry, I shouldn't," she began, but he raised a hand. "I said the library was yours. And it is. You may use it as you wish." He approached, looked at the book in her hands. "Ah, Camões. Good choice." It was the first real conversation they had had since the wedding. Augusto, usually so reserved, began to talk about poetry, about how those verses had been written centuries ago but still spoke of eternal things, love, loss, longing. Clara listened, fascinated not only by the words, but by this man who revealed himself to be different when he spoke of things he loved. "You really do read well," he commented, surprised. "Who taught you?" "My Aunt Mercedes. She was a teacher before she got sick. She used to say that reading was like having invisible wings." Augusto nodded thoughtfully. "Your aunt is a wise woman." He hesitated, then continued, "If you wish, I can teach you more. about numbers, about how contracts work, about land management. Knowledge is power, Clara, and you should have that power. It was the first time he had called her just by her name, without formalities. And it was the first time Clara saw in him something beyond the sick man who had bought her womb. She saw a teacher, someone who recognized value in her beyond her biological utility. Thus began a new ritual. After the silent dinners, Augusto would take her to the office and teach her. He showed her accounting books, explained crop rotations, taught her to understand contracts. Clara absorbed everything eagerly, her mind, hungry for knowledge, finally being fed. One night, as they studied by lamplight, Augusto suddenly said, "You are intelligent, Clara, more so than many men I know. It's a waste that the world doesn't recognize that." Clara looked at him surprised. It was perhaps the first genuine compliment she had received from him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me, it's just the truth." He closed the book they were studying. When I am no longer here, you will need to know how to manage all this. The boy will be too young for years. You will be the one making the decisions." The boy. They didn't even know if she was pregnant yet, but he always spoke of the future, as if the child already existed, was already real. That night, when Augusto came to her room, something was different. He touched her face gently before putting out the lamp, and for the first time, Clara didn't close her eyes, trying to be somewhere else. Maybe they were starting to get to know each other. Maybe within that cold agreement, they were discovering small embers of something more human. The summer days advanced, and with them, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the distance between Clara and Augusto began to lessen. It wasn't love yet, maybe it never would be, but it was respect, mutual curiosity, and something that could, with enough time, blossom into friendship. But would time be generous enough? The disease eating away at Augusto from the inside had no patience to wait for slow blooms. September arrived with cool mornings and still warm afternoons. The fields around the farm were golden with ripe wheat, and the air smelled of fertile earth and the promise of harvest. Clara woke one morning feeling a strange nausea, a dizziness that came not from illness, but from something deeper. For 3 days she ignored the signs. But when she couldn't eat breakfast for the 4th time in a row, when the smell of certain food she once loved began to turn her stomach, when she felt her breasts were sensitive and a fatigue that made her sleep during the afternoon, she knew. Dr. Henrique Tavares came on a cloudy September afternoon. He examined her in her room, with Donna Eulalia present as was appropriate. Afterward, with a discreet smile, he confirmed, 5, maybe 6 weeks. You are pregnant, Senora Valente. Congratulations. Clara asked to be alone when she told Augusto. She waited until dinner when they were seated in their usual places at that table that had witnessed so many silences. The candles flickered between them, creating dancing shadows on the walls. "Augusto," she said, and he looked up surprised. She rarely initiated conversations during meals. Dr. Tavares was here today. She saw his body tense, his fingers grip the fork. In his grey eyes was equal measure of hope and fear. "I am expecting a child." For a moment Augusto remained completely still. Then he dropped the fork with a metallic clatter, covered his face with his hands, and Clara realized with a shock that he was crying. Not sobs, just silent tears streaming between the fingers of a man who had finally seen the salvation of everything he loved. She got up, not knowing exactly what to do, and walked over to him. She touched his shoulder hesitantly. Augusto grabbed her hand like a drowning man grabs a plank, and buried his face against Clara's still flat stomach. "Thank you," he whispered against the fabric of her dress. "Thank God. Thank you." It was the first time Clara had seen him vulnerable, stripped of the formality that always separated them, and in that moment something changed inside her. It wasn't love yet, but it was deep compassion, a recognition of shared humanity, of the fragility they both carried in different ways. After that night, Augusto was transformed. He became more attentive, genuinely concerned for her well-being. He sent for softer pillows, made sure she ate properly, accompanied her on walks through the gardens, as if afraid she might vanish like smoke. One afternoon, as they walked among the rose bushes that Carmela had planted years before and that Clara now tended, Augusto spoke about his first marriage. With Carmela, it was like living with a polite shadow. We ate together, slept in the same hallway, but never really knew each other. It was a marriage of convenience without even the decency to try to be more than that. He looked at the horizon. When she died, I felt only emptiness. Not sadness, not relief, just nothing. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked softly. "Because I want you to know that this, what we have now, It's strange, I know, born of absurd circumstances. But there is more life in this than there was in years of a proper marriage. He stopped, turned to look her in the eyes. You gave me hope, Clara, not just because of the child, but because there is someone in this house with whom I can talk about Camoys and hear her intelligent opinion. Someone who asks insightful questions about land contracts. Someone who sees me as something more than a dying man desperately trying to leave a legacy. Clara felt tears burn her eyes. I didn't know you felt that way. Neither did I until recently. The lessons after dinner continued, but now they had a different flavor. Augusto was literally teaching Clara to command an empire she would inherit, not just in her son's name, but in her own right. He showed her the maps of the lands, explained the complexities of crop rotation, introduced her to the most experienced workers who could advise her. Sebastião is loyal and honest, he said of the foreman. Trust him. Dona Eulalia seems severe, but she has a heart of gold and knows every secret of this house. The blacksmith, Jose, has the hands of an artist. The cook, Maria, knows recipes that are generations old. These people are the heart of the farm, Clara. Treat them well and they will treat you well. Clara absorbed everything, her hands frequently touching the belly that was beginning to round subtly. Inside her grew not only a child, but also a new version of herself, a woman who was learning to take up space, to have a voice, to believe her opinions mattered. One night, as they were studying old documents by the dim lamplight, Augusto suddenly took her hand across the table. There is something I need to say, he began, his voice hoarse. When I proposed this arrangement, I was only thinking of saving the lands, of stopping Rodolfo. But now, Clara, this is no longer just an agreement for me. You have become important. Not in the way I originally planned, but in a way I didn't expect. Clara looked at their fingers intertwined. What are you saying? I'm saying I've begun to care. Truly, not as a husband by obligation, but as someone who admires who you are. Your silent strength, your intelligence, your kindness that remained intact despite everything life has done to you. Augusto, Clara whispered, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. He brought her hand to his lips, kissed it gently. Go rest. You and the baby need to sleep. That night, as Clara lay alone in her bed, one hand on her womb where life was growing, she allowed herself to feel something she had been avoiding since the wedding day. Maybe, just maybe, that cold agreement could turn into something warmer. Maybe the heart, that stubborn muscle, could learn to love even in the most unlikely circumstances. Autumn advanced, painting the valley in golds and reds. And inside the big house of the Valente farm, two people who began as strangers united by desperation were slowly discovering that intimacy can be born not only from passion, but also from respect, mutual admiration, and the simple act of truly seeing one another. But time, that cruel thief, continued its relentless march, and the disease did not negotiate extensions. November arrived with cold winds that swept down from the mountains and through the corridors of the big house. Clara's belly was noticeable now, a gentle curve that announced life. She could no longer wear her old dresses, and Donna Eulalia, with surprising gentleness, had helped adjust Carmela's clothes that had been stored in trunks for years. The previous mistress was taller, Eulalia commented as she adjusted the hems, but she had your slim waist. With a few adjustments, these dresses will look beautiful on you, madam. The previous mistress. Clara sometimes found herself thinking about Carmela, the woman who had lived in this same house, perhaps slept in this same room, looked out the same window. Two women who married the same man for pragmatic reasons, but whose experiences were as different as winter and summer. Augusto was visibly worsening. His skin now had a definitively yellowish tint. The dark circles under his eyes were deep as graves, and he had lost so much weight that his clothes hung loosely on the body that had once been robust. But his mind remained sharp, and his determination to prepare Clara was almost feverish. One afternoon he took her to the farm offices, a separate building near the barns where the records, surveying tools and old maps were kept. It was a place that smelled of old leather, ink, and the history of generations of Valentes who had built that empire from nothing. I want to show you something, Augusto said, opening a safe built into the wall. From inside, he removed stacks of carefully organized documents. These are the property titles, the contracts with suppliers, the agreements with the workers. Everything is in order, everything registered. When I am no bee, this will be protected. Clara held the papers, feeling not just the physical weight, but the symbolic one. You've taught me so much these weeks, Augusto, but I still feel inadequate. I'm just a seamstress who learned to read. How can I— You underestimate your worth, he interrupted gently. In these weeks I've seen how quickly you learn, how you ask intelligent questions, how the workers are already beginning to respect you. I've also seen your embroidery, Clara, the way your hands create beauty from simple threads. That is art, it is patience, it is vision, the same qualities needed to manage land. He touched her belly gently for the first time. And more importantly, you have kindness. This farm doesn't just need someone efficient, it needs someone with a heart. That day, as they walked back to the big house at dusk, Augusto staggered. Clara quickly caught him, feeling how he trembled. You need to rest, she said, concerned. There's no time for rest, he replied, but allowed her to help him walk. The nights became different. Augusto no longer had the energy for visits to Clara's room. Instead, they began a new ritual. She would go to his room with a book, sit in the armchair near the fireplace and read while he rested. Poetry mostly. Camões, Gil Vicente, poets who spoke of love and loss in verses that crossed centuries. One of those nights, after Clara had finished reading a particularly beautiful sonnet about longing, Augusto spoke in the dim light. Clara, can I ask you a personal question? You can. Do you hate me for putting you in this position? Clara lowered the book, thought carefully before answering. In the beginning I felt anger and humiliation. I felt like I was selling something sacred. She paused. But now I see that you gave me something I never would have had otherwise. Knowledge. Access to entire worlds contained in books. The possibility for my aunt to live her last years without pain. And, he encouraged gently, and your company. Conversations that make me think. The respect with which you treat me, despite having all the power in this transaction. No, Augusto, I don't hate you. There was a long silence. Then, in a voice barely audible, I fell in love with you, Clara. The book almost fell from her hands. What? Augusto sat up in bed with difficulty, looking at her through the gloom. It wasn't supposed to happen, it was just supposed to be a practical agreement. But then I saw you reading with that intense concentration, saw you asking brilliant questions about crop rotation, saw you being kind to the maids even though you were technically the mistress, and I fell in love with the person you are. Clara felt tears run down her face. Augusto, You don't have to reciprocate, he said quickly. I know this all started wrong. I know you accepted out of necessity, not choice. I just needed you to know before there's no more time. You've given me more life in these months than I had in all the previous years. Clara got up, went to the bed, sat on the edge. She took his hand in hers, that large hand that now trembled constantly. I don't know if what I feel is love, but I know I care. I know I respect who you are. I know I'm going to miss you. He brought her hand to his face, closed his eyes. It's more than I deserve. We all deserve to be loved, Augusto, even when time is too short. That night, Clara slept in the armchair next to his bed, a blanket over her shoulders. There was nothing improper or romantic, just two human beings finding comfort in each other's presence as the shadows of mortality lengthened in the room. The next day, Augusto asked her to walk with him to the hill where the small family cemetery was located. It was a quiet place, surrounded by old cypress trees, from where one could see the entire valley. When I am buried here, he said, without fear or melancholy, just practical acceptance. I want you to bring the boy to visit me sometimes. Tell him stories about me. Don't let me be just a name on a cold headstone. It will be Gabriel, Clara said suddenly. If it's a boy, I want to name him Gabriel, like the archangel. Augusto smiled, a real smile that briefly lit up his sick face. Gabriel Augusto Valente. That name has strength. It has hope. The sunset painted the sky in oranges and reds as they descended the hill. Clara walked slowly, one hand on her belly where Gabriel was growing, the other holding Augusto's arm, who now needed support to walk. And there, between the life being born and the life departing, Clara finally understood that love doesn't have just one form. Sometimes it arrives like thunder and lightning. Sometimes it comes as a gentle rain that soaks the earth little by little. And sometimes it arrives too late to change the end, but still in time to transform the journey. Winter was approaching, bringing with it promises of snow and inevitable farewells. December entered, covered in ice. The first snow fell on a grey morning, transforming the valley into a dreamscape where everything was silenced and white. Clara was in her 8th month of pregnancy now, her large belly making every movement a challenge. She walked slowly through the corridors, one hand always supporting her aching back. Augusto rarely left his room now. The disease had advanced brutally in recent weeks. Dr. Tavares came almost daily, increasing the doses of laudanum to control the pain that often left Augusto moaning softly, biting his lips to keep from screaming. His skin had a yellow-orange hue, his sunken eyes shone with constant fever, and he had lost so much weight he looked like a sketch of his former self. Mercedes, now recovered and strong, helped Clara with maternal dedication. She was the one who had taken over many of the household tasks, insisting that her niece rest. Donna Eulalia had also shown surprising affection, preparing special teas, making sure Clara ate properly. "You need to keep your strength up, madam," the housekeeper would say, while bringing trays of food. "The baby needs it, and the master needs to see you well." Clara spent most of her time in Augusto's room. She would sit by the bed, read to him when he was lucid enough to listen, hold his hand when the pain was so intense he couldn't speak. Sometimes he would be delirious, calling for people she didn't know, reliving childhood memories in the fields, but there were also moments of crystalline clarity. On one of those afternoons, with the snow falling silently outside, Augusto asked Clara to bring specific documents from the office. "Everything is protected," he explained, his voice weak but determined. "The will, registered in 3 different notary offices. The property goes to Gabriel. You will be the administrator until he turns 21. There are separate funds for you for Mercedes to ensure you never lack anything. Sebastião knows everything and will help you. And there are letters," he pointed to a drawer in the desk. "Letters for Gabriel, one for each birthday until he's 18 and one for you for after." Clara had to leave the room, tears blinding her. She went to the bathroom, washed her face, tried to control the sobs that shook her body. "It's not fair," she thought angrily. "It's not fair that he's leaving just when we were starting to truly understand each other." Christmas Eve was especially difficult. Augusto had a prolonged moment of lucidity, something that hadn't happened in days. He asked Clara to sit beside him on the bed. "There is something important I need to say while I still can," he began, holding her hands with surprising strength. "Rodolfo will try to contest the will. He is corrupt but not stupid. But the lawyer Ferreira, whom I've trusted for years, prepared documents that are legally ironclad. There is no loophole Rodolfo can exploit." "Don't talk like that," Clara pleaded. "As if it's—" "I'm going to die, Clara. Probably in weeks, maybe days. We need to speak clearly about this." His grey eyes, once so penetrating, now clouded by illness, fixed on hers. "I want you to be happy. After I'm gone, I want you to love again if you find someone. Don't be tied to a ghost." "Augusto, let me finish. You gave me a gift I don't deserve, the chance to leave something good in the world. Gabriel will be that legacy, but also the way you will manage these lands. Be fair, as you are. Be kind. Teach our son about justice, compassion, the importance of knowledge." He paused to breathe, each breath a painful effort. "And keep writing. I saw the notebooks where you record the farms day to day. Keep doing that. So Gabriel knows his history, our history. So he understands that not all beginnings are beautiful, but all beginnings deserve to be remembered." "I'll do all that," Clara promised, tears falling freely now. "Everything. I promise. I love you, Clara. I know it's too late for that to matter much. I know you accepted this marriage out of necessity, but I want you to know these months with you were the only ones in my entire life where I felt truly alive." Clara leaned over, kissed him for the first time of her own free will, not out of obligation. A gentle kiss, laden with all that could not be, of all the futures they would not have. "I love you too," she whispered, in a strange, impossible, perhaps insufficient way. But truly, they stayed like that for a long time, embracing awkwardly because of Clara's belly, as the snow continued to fall and the world outside became increasingly white and silent. In the following days, Augusto slipped into a state of semi-consciousness. Dr. Tavares increased the laudanum so much that he rarely woke. Clara sat by the bed, one hand on her belly where Gabriel was kicking ever more strongly, the other hand holding Augusto's. Life and death, dancing their eternal dance in the same room. Mercedes came to visit, brought soups Clara could barely eat. Sebastião stopped by to give reports on the farm, his red eyes betraying that he, too, mourned the imminent death of the boss he respected like a brother. One night, when January had already begun and the winter storm lashed the windows, Gabriel began to show signs that he was ready to arrive. The initial contractions woke Clara, who was sleeping in the armchair next to Augusto's bed. Dr. Tavares was called. Mercedes and Donna Eulalia took their positions. Clara was taken back to her room, but she insisted, let me talk to him, just a minute. Supported by Mercedes, Clara returned to Augusto's room. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and irregular. She leaned in, whispered in his ear, "Augusto, Gabriel is coming. Our son is coming. Fight. Fight to meet him." But medicine is cruel in its certainties. The birth would take hours, and time, that implacable tyrant, offered no guarantees. As the storm raged outside and the contractions intensified, Clara was taken away from the room where Augusto lay dying, to give birth to the child who was at once the salvation and the farewell. And fate, with its brutal sense of irony, prepared to give with one hand while taking with the other. Labor began on the stormy January night and continued through the early morning. Clara fought against waves of pain that seemed to want to split her in two, biting down on a cloth so as not to scream. Mercedes held her hand, wiped her sweat, whispered words of encouragement. Donna Eulalia and Dr. Tavares worked efficiently, preparing everything. The dawn arrived grey and cold. The snow was still falling, softer now, as if the sky was tired of its own fury. The contractions intensified, and Clara entered that strange place where nothing else exists except the impossible task of bringing life into the world. "A little more, my girl," Mercedes encouraged. "A little more." At noon, when the sun finally broke through the clouds and illuminated the room with golden light, Gabriel Augusto Valente was born. His cry was strong, indignant, vigorous. A small but perfectly formed boy, with wet black hair and clenched fists that punched the air as if already fighting the world. Clara laughed and cried simultaneously when they placed him in her arms. "Hello, little Gabriel," she whispered, touching the reddish face. "Welcome. Your father is waiting to meet you." Dr. Tavares quickly cleaned the baby, wrapped him in soft blankets. "This one is strong. Lungs of a bull. Can I take him to Augusto?" Clara asked, still exhausted but determined. Dr. Tavares and Mercedes exchanged glances. "Senora Clara, the master is very weak. Perhaps it's better—" "Please." Her voice was firm despite the exhaustion. "He needs to meet his son. He needs to." They helped her get up to walk slowly down the hall. Gabriel in Mercedes's arms ahead of her, Clara leaning on Donna Eulalia. Every step hurt, but she didn't stop. When they entered Augusto's room, Clara saw immediately that the end was near. His breathing was extremely weak, irregular. His skin had an almost orange hue now, and there was a stillness about him that wasn't sleep, but something deeper. "Augusto," Clara called softly, sitting with difficulty on the edge of the bed. "Augusto, Gabriel is here." His eyes opened slowly, clouded but still conscious. Mercedes placed the baby in Clara's arms, who held him close to Augusto. "Look," Clara whispered, tears streaming. "Look at our son, Gabriel Augusto." With immense effort, Augusto raised a trembling hand and touched the baby's cheek. A tiny, painful but genuine smile touched his lips. "Strong," he whispered, his voice just a breath. "Like you." Gabriel, with the inexplicable wisdom of newborns, fell quiet, as if understanding the importance of the moment. His still dark eyes tried to focus on his father's face. "Gabriel," Augusto repeated, tasting the name. "Miguel defeated dragons. Gabriel, be strong, but be gentle, like your mother." "Don't go yet," Clara pleaded, knowing it was useless but unable to stop trying. "Stay a little longer, please." "Love, you," Augusto whispered, looking alternately at Clara and the baby. "Both so precious." His hand fell, strengthless. His eyes closed again. "Doctor." Tavares touched his pulse, motioned for Mercedes to take Clara back to her room. Clara spent the next 3 days in a state of physical and emotional exhaustion. She breastfed Gabriel, who was a hungry and noisy baby. She slept when he slept. And she waited for the news she knew would come. In the early morning of the 3rd day, as the first rays of sun began to lighten the horizon, Donna Eulalia entered the room silently. Her face said everything. "Senora Clara, Dom Augusto. He is gone, a few minutes ago. In peace, in his sleep." Clara held Gabriel against her chest, buried her face in the baby's soft hair, and cried. She cried for the man who had been essentially a stranger, but who had become too important, too late. She cried for the injustice of Gabriel growing up without knowing the father who had wanted him so much. She cried for the brief months of learning and companionship that ended before they truly began. Mercedes entered, hugged her niece and grandnephew, letting Clara sob against her shoulder while Gabriel slept on, oblivious, tiny and perfect, carrying a legacy he couldn't even imagine. The funeral was 2 days later. The snow had stopped, leaving the world covered in pristine white. It seemed the entire valley attended. Workers Augusto had treated with justice, neighbors who respected his integrity, merchants who trusted his word. Clara couldn't go. She was still recovering from childbirth, but from her bedroom window, with Gabriel sleeping in the cradle beside her, she watched the procession climb the hill to the small family cemetery. She saw the dark wooden coffin being carried by Sebastio and other men from the farm. She saw the white flowers that covered the grave in the snow. A Dom Augusto Valente, 1836–1879, a just man, an honorable master, a father who departed too soon. That night, alone in her room with only the soft sound of Gabriel's breathing, Clara opened the letter Augusto had left for her. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, it means I have already departed. I hope it was quick without much suffering. More than that, I hope Gabriel is healthy and that you are well. I don't know how to thank you for what you gave me in these months. Not just Gabriel, but also true companionship, conversations that made my mind live when my body was dying, and love, even if too late to be fully lived. Take care of our son. Teach him kindness above all. Show him that the lands are not just properties but homes for many families. Read to him as you read to me. Let him know books, knowledge, but also the land and honest work. And you, Clara, do not bury your life along with mine. You are 21. You have decades ahead of you. Be happy. Love again if your heart allows. Do not let this sad story be the end of your story. Thank you for accepting my absurd proposal. Thank you for staying. Thank you for giving me not only an heir but also the best months of my entire life. With all my love and gratitude." Augusto. Clara folded the letter carefully, put it in the desk drawer along with the embroidered handkerchief she had made for him, the silver pocket watch he used to wear, and the wedding ring they took from his finger before the burial. Then she took her notebook and began to write, because Augusto had asked her to keep recording the farm's history. "Today we buried Dom Augusto Valente, and today Gabriel Augusto Valente, at only 4 days old, became the heir to an empire who will never know the father who wanted him so much. But I promise you, my son, that you will know your history. You will know the man who was your father, not just through my stories, but through the actions I will take managing these lands as he taught me. And I also promise you, Augusto, wherever you are, I will not waste everything you taught me. I will not let Rodolfo destroy your legacy. Gabriel will grow up strong, just and kind. This I promise with every fiber of my being." And so, in a big house silenced by snow and loss, a young widow of 21, with a 4-day-old baby in her arms, took command of an empire born of extraordinary circumstances. The cold agreement had transformed into something warmer, but time had been insufficient. Now all that remained was to live with the legacy and honor, the memory of the man who saw her, when the whole world looked right through her. The first few months without Augusto were the hardest. Clara divided herself between caring for Gabriel, who was a demanding and noisy baby, and managing the farm, which was a monumental task. Sebastian was her right-hand man, teaching her what Augusto hadn't had time to teach, translating theoretical lessons into daily practice. "You have a knack for this, madam," the foreman commented one afternoon, after Clara diplomatically resolved a dispute between two workers over task division. Dom Augusto chose well, but not everything was easy. There was initial resistance. Pedro, one of the older workers, openly questioned during a meeting, "How can we trust decisions to such a young woman? No offense, madam, but you've barely lived." Clara could have used her authority, could have fired him. Instead, she replied calmly, "You are right, Pedro, I am young, but Dom Augusto personally taught me about contracts, crop rotations, resource management, and more importantly, he taught me to listen. So I am listening to you now. If you have suggestions on how to improve things, I would like to hear them." The silence that followed was heavy. Then Pedro, surprised by the response, began to talk about an irrigation system that could improve productivity. Clara listened, asked intelligent questions, and implemented the viable suggestions. From that day on, Pedro became one of her most fervent supporters. Gabriel grew quickly and healthily. At 6 months, he was already rolling on the floor and smiling constantly. He had Clara's light eyes but Augusto's dark hair and broad forehead. Every night before sleeping, Clara held him and told him stories about his father. "Your father was a just and kind man. He loved these fields, these lands, and he loved you even before you were born. He planted trees he would never see grow, Gabriel. He did that for you. Mercedes, now in renewed health, helped care for her grandson with maternal dedication. She was the one who sang lullabies, who rocked him when Clara needed to resolve farm issues. Rodolfo, as Augusto had predicted, tried to contest the will. He showed up at the farm 3 months after the funeral, elegant but with snake-like eyes, demanding to see the documents. "This is absurd," he declared, leafing through the papers that lawyer Ferreira presented. "My cousin left everything to a seamstress, and to a baby that can't even be proven to be his?" Clara, sitting behind the desk that had been Augusto's, replied with a cold voice, "Mr. Rodolfo is free to contest this in court if he wishes, but I warn you, Dom Augusto registered the will in 3 notary offices. Gabriel is legally recognized, and I was prepared by your cousin to manage these lands until my son comes of age." "We'll see," Rodolfo snarled, but left defeated. The legal battle that followed lasted 6 months and was overwhelming. Lawyer Ferreira, with his decades of experience, destroyed Rodolfo's every argument. The documents were impeccable, the witnesses numerous and reliable. Gabriel was unquestionably the legitimate son of Augusto Valente. When the judge finally delivered the sentence, Clara was present in the courtroom with Gabriel in her lap. He was 1 year and 3 months old now, big light eyes observing everything with curiosity. "Mr. Rodolfo Valente," the judge declared, "your allegations have been found baseless. The will of Dom Augusto Valente is valid and will be executed as written. If you attempt further frivolous contests, you will be fined for bad faith litigation." Clara left the courthouse with her head held high. At the door, Rodolfo was waiting for her, his face contorted with hatred. "You're an adventurer who seduced a dying man," he spat. "And you are a man who lost the chance to honor his family out of greed," Clara replied calmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to get back home, to the farm that will continue to prosper without your interference." The following years were ones of growth. Clara implemented changes that were revolutionary for the time. She built a small school on the property, hired a teacher to teach the workers' children. When questioned about the cost, she replied, "Knowledge is an investment, not an expense." She established a medical dispensary, calling Dr. Tavares monthly for preventive checkups. Healthy workers are productive workers, but more importantly, they are human beings who deserve care. She established a retirement system for elderly workers. Jose worked these lands for 40 years. He deserves to end his days with dignity, not with fear of hunger. The Valente farm became not only the most prosperous in the region, but also the most respected. Neighboring farmers began to copy Clara's methods. Some criticized her. "She's too soft, treats workers like equals." But the results spoke for themselves. Record productivity, unwavering loyalty, an impeccable reputation. Clara received regular marriage proposals, widowed farmers, rising merchants, even a lawyer from the capital. All were politely but firmly refused. Mercedes sometimes questioned, "Child, you are still young. Gabriel needs a father. Gabriel has the father he has, even if he is no longer here. And I lived my great love, Auntie. It was brief, it was strange, it was imperfect, but it was real. I don't need another." She continued writing in the notebooks, meticulously recording the life of the farm. When Gabriel was 5, she began to read the notes to him, adapted into child-friendly language. "Your father planted these olive groves when he was your age, Gabriel. See how big the trees are now." Gabriel, a serious and observant boy, absorbed everything. "Is Papa in heaven?" "He is, but he's also in the trees he planted, in the houses he built for the workers, in the books he left for us to read. People don't die completely as long as their actions remain alive." In 1885, when Gabriel was 6 and Clara was 27, Mercedes fell ill again. This time it wasn't the lung disease, but simply old age. Her 72 years weighed on her, her body tired after a life of work and adversity. On a sweet autumn afternoon with golden leaves falling outside, Mercedes called Clara and Gabriel to her bedside. "I've lived longer than I expected," she said, her voice weak but serene. "I saw you become the extraordinary woman I always knew you would be, Clara. And I met this beautiful boy." She touched Gabriel's face with a trembling hand. "You will be like your father, little one, just and kind." "Don't talk like that, Auntie," Clara pleaded, tears streaming. "Hush, child. Death is not an enemy when one has lived well. And I lived well. I raised you. I saw you survive, thrive. What more could I ask for?" Mercedes passed away that same night, in her sleep. No pain, no struggle. She simply slipped back into the silence from which we all come. They buried her next to Augusto's tomb under a weeping willow. Gabriel, at 6 years old, asked, "Mommy, when people die, do they meet in heaven?" Clara hugged her son, thought of Augusto and Mercedes, two people who had saved her life in different ways. "I hope so, my love. I hope so." And life continued its inexorable march on the Valente farm. Clara, now 27, was respected as one of the most efficient administrators in the region. Gabriel grew strong and curious. The fields flourished under wise management. The legacy Augusto so feared losing was not only preserved, but expanding. But the biggest challenge was yet to come: how to prepare a son to inherit not just lands, but principles. How to turn a boy into the man his father dreamed he would be. Gabriel at 15 was a perfect combination of both his parents. He had Augusto's height and broad shoulders, but Clara's thoughtful eyes. He was serious, responsible beyond his years, with a sense of justice that sometimes worried his mother with its intensity. He had worked alongside her in the farm's administration since he was 12, learning not just theory, but practice. He knew every worker by name, knew which children studied in the school his mother had built, understood the planting cycles as if they were the natural rhythms of his own body. It was the spring of 1894. The Valente farm was prospering like never before. Clara, now 36, was considered one of the most influential women in the region. Her hair had a few premature white strands, but her eyes held the same quiet determination as always. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in the office, Gabriel said something he had been rehearsing for weeks. "Mother, I want to study law in the capital." Clara stopped writing, looked at her son. "Law? Yes. I want to learn about laws, about how to protect property, about justice." He hesitated. "I want to be able to defend what Papa built, what you expanded, but I also want to help other people, workers who are exploited, families who lose land over technicalities in contracts." Clara felt pride and fear simultaneously. "The capital is a 2-day trip, Gabriel. You would stay in a boarding house, only come back on holidays." "I know, and I don't want to abandon you, Mother. I know how hard you've worked, so I could have all this, but—" He looked out the window at the fields stretching to the horizon. "Papa never knew me, but you always told me about him, about how he believed knowledge was power, about how he wanted me to be just and kind. How can I truly be that if I don't learn everything I can?" Clara got up, walked to the window beside her son. Together they looked at the lands that were theirs, but that also belonged to all the families who worked there, who lived there. "Your father would be proud," she said finally. "Very proud. And I am too." She turned to look him in the eye, had to tilt her head up now that he was taller than her. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you won't forget where you came from, that you'll remember these lands aren't just properties on paper, but real homes for real people, that you'll use all this knowledge not just to protect what is ours, but to make the world a little more just." Gabriel hugged his mother, something he didn't do often at 15. "I promise, Mother, I promise." In the following months, they prepared for his departure. Clara pulled strings to get him a place in one of the best colleges in the capital. Sebastião, now with completely white hair but still strong, would take on more responsibilities in Gabriel's absence. A ritual Gabriel insisted on before leaving was to go up to the family cemetery. Every year on the anniversary of Augusto's death, mother and son would climb the hill, take white flowers to the grave. That year, on the eve of Gabriel's departure, the climb had special meaning. Clara carried white lilies, Gabriel carried one of the notebooks where she had recorded the farm's history. They knelt before the simple but well-kept headstone, Dom Augusto Valente, 1836-1879, father, husband, guardian of these lands. "Father," Gabriel began, as he always did, "I'm going to the capital to study law. I know if you were here, you would encourage me. Mother told me how you valued knowledge, how you taught me through her everything I needed to know." He opened the notebook, read passages Clara had written years ago about Augusto, about the conversations they had, about the lessons he had taught. "I will make you proud of me," Gabriel promised. "I will protect these lands and these people as you wanted, and when I return, I will be worthy of the name I carry." Clara put her hand on her son's shoulder, silent tears streaming. She thought about how Augusto had never seen Gabriel take his first step, never heard him laugh, never held him, but she also thought about how, in a strange way, Augusto was present in every choice Gabriel made, in every value he demonstrated. The dead live on through those they leave behind. The farewell was at the train station, a new building that connected the valley to the capital. Gabriel, with his leather suitcase containing clothes, books, and Clara's notebooks, hugged his mother for a long time. "Write often," Clara pleaded. "Tell me everything. Every week," he promised. "And I'll be back for the holidays. The farm still needs me." She laughed through her tears. "The farm will always need you. You are a Valenti. It's in your blood." When the train departed, Clara stood on the platform until it was just a dot on the horizon. She felt simultaneously proud and devastated, happy and lonely. 16 years, she thought, since Augusto made me that impossible proposal. 16 years since I accepted out of desperation and fear. And now look where we are. A strong, just son leaving to study law, prosperous and well-managed lands, a legacy that honors the memory of a man who lived little but loved deeply. She returned to the farm, to the big house that no longer seemed intimidating but rather a home. She sat in the office that had been Augusto's, now hers, and picked up the current volume of her notebook. There were 16 volumes now, meticulously recording each year of the farm. She began to write. "Today, Gabrielle left for the capital. The house already feels quieter, emptier, but I am happy. I am raising exactly the kind of man Augusto dreamed of, someone strong but compassionate, intelligent but humble, ambitious but just. Sometimes I wonder, would it have been different if Augusto had lived, if we had had years together instead of just months? But then I remember, we don't choose how much time we have. We only choose what we do with the time we are given. And we, Augusto and I, used our brief time to create something that will last for generations." Clara closed the notebook, looked out the window at the valley she now knew as intimately as the lines on her own hand. And for the first time in many years, she allowed herself to feel something she had never expected to feel again. Peace. Not the peace of complete happiness, for certain losses are never fully healed, but the peace of knowing she had lived well, loved well, and honored the dead through the way she lived. 3 years passed. Gabriel returned for holidays regularly, always with more knowledge, more self-assured, but also more aware of the world's injustices. His studies in the capital had opened his eyes to harsh realities. Exploited workers with no legal protection, families evicted from lands over technicalities in contracts, the way the legal system often favored the powerful. It was the summer of 1897. Gabriel, now 18, was about to graduate. Clara was 39, a few more white strands in her hair, but still strong and determined. On a sunny Sunday, mother and son climbed again to the family cemetery. It was a tradition they kept whenever Gabriel returned. Visit the graves of Augusto and Mercedes, tell them the news. They sat under the willow tree, the valley stretching out green below them. "Mother," Gabriel began, hesitant, "can I ask you a question?" "Always. How was it really? Your marriage to father? I know you always tell me beautiful stories about how you loved each other, how he taught you everything. But," he looked at her directly, "I read the notebooks, Mother. All of them. I read about the proposal, about the agreement, about how it all began." Clara's heart tightened. She knew this day would come, but she wasn't prepared. "When did you read them?" 2 years ago. I was looking for information on an old contract and found the first volumes. I read everything." He took her hand. "I'm not judging, Mother. I would never judge, but I want to know the truth. How was it really?" Clara looked at Augusto's grave as if asking for permission or courage. Then she began to speak, this time without embellishing, without softening. She told him about the initial humiliation of feeling like a rented womb, about the cold nights when she cried alone, about the shame of accepting what felt like selling herself. But she also told him about how Augusto had treated her with unexpected respect, about the conversations that turned a transaction into friendship, about how love had grown like a slow but resilient plant. "So you really did love each other?" Gabriel asked. "We did, in a strange, imperfect way born of absurd circumstances. But yes, Gabriel, your father and I loved each other. It wasn't love at first sight from romantic stories. It was love built brick by brick, conversation by conversation, mutual respect by mutual respect." Clara wiped away a tear. "And it was real as any love can be." Gabriel was quiet for a long time, processing. "Do you regret it?" "Accepting the proposal," Clara thought carefully. "Yes and no. I regret the pain, the initial humiliation, the brevity of the time we had. But I don't regret you, or meeting your father, or learning that I could be more than a humble seamstress. I don't regret saving Mercedes or building the life we've built. And you never married again. Why?" Clara smiled sadly. Because I lived my great love, son. It was complicated, it was short, but it was deep. And because, she looked at the fields below, because I discovered I could be happy alone but accompanied by purpose. These lands, these workers, you, Gabriel, always you, were more than enough to fill my life. Gabriel hugged his mother, something he did less now that he was a grown man. You are the strongest woman I know, mother, and father was lucky to have found you. We were both lucky, Clara corrected. He gave me opportunity when the whole world only saw a poor seamstress, and I gave him hope when he only saw death approaching. They descended the hill in companionable silence. But there was something else weighing on Clara's heart, something she needed to say before Gabriel left again. That night, after dinner, she asked him to come to the office. She took out a wooden box kept in the deepest drawer of the desk. Your father left this for you. Letters. One for each birthday until your 18th. Clara held the box. I could have given them to you gradually, but I decided to wait until you were man enough to fully understand. She opened the box. Inside were 18 envelopes, each marked with a number. Gabriel took them with trembling hands. May I? His voice failed. Read them alone. Take your time. Gabriel went up to his room, and Clara stayed in the office, wondering what Augusto had written in those letters he had prepared, knowing he would die before seeing his son grow up. Hours later, when the night was advanced, Gabriel returned. His eyes were red, but there was something new in his expression, a deeper understanding, a connection with a father he had never known, but who now seemed more real. He knew me, Gabriel said, marveling. Or at least, he knew the kind of man I could be. The letters. Mother, it's like he's speaking directly to me, about choices, about justice, about loving the land, but also the people, about being strong but gentle, about, he swallowed hard, about how he loved me before I even existed. Clara hugged her son, letting him cry as he hadn't since childhood. He loved you more than anything, Gabriel. You were his redemption, his hope, his way of staying alive in the world. And I will honor him, Gabriel promised through his tears. I will be worthy of what you both built. I will use my legal knowledge to protect not only our lands, but also to help those who have no voice. I will make the Valente name synonymous with justice, as he wanted. And that night, in the big house of the Valente farm, under the same stars that had witnessed an absurd proposal 18 years earlier, mother and son made a silent pact. To continue the legacy not just by preserving lands, but by planting justice, not just by inheriting a name, but by honoring principles. The circle was closing. The story that began with desperation and necessity had transformed into something greater, a lineage of kindness, knowledge, and compassion that would cross generations. It was February 1898. 20 years since that impossible proposal had changed everything. Clara was sitting on the porch of the big house at 40 years old, watching the sunset paint the valley in oranges and pinks. Gabriel had graduated from law school with the highest honors in his class and had returned not only to manage the farm, but to open a small office where he provided free legal aid to workers who needed it. The Valente farm was now a benchmark, not only in productivity but in social innovation. Other properties copied the model of the school for workers' children, the dignified retirement system, the medical dispensary. Clara was frequently invited to speak at farmers' associations, where she spoke not as the seamstress she had been, but as the respected administrator she was. Sebastião, now 70, had finally retired. At his farewell party, he had hugged Clara and whispered, "Dom Augusto chose right, very right. You made these lands sing, madam." That February afternoon, Gabriel climbed the hill to the family cemetery. It was the anniversary of Augusto's death, and he always made this pilgrimage alone now. Clara watched him from a distance, her tall, strong son carrying white flowers, and felt gratitude for all that had been, even what had hurt. When Gabriel returned, he found his mother still on the porch. He sat beside her in the companionable silence that only very close people can share. "I was thinking," Clara said finally, "about how strange life is. 20 years ago I was a desperate seamstress, accepting an absurd proposal out of pure fear. And now," she gestured to the fields, to the house, to everything. "Now I have an extraordinary son, prosperous lands, the respect of the community." "How did this happen?" Gabriel smiled. "It happened because you turned every challenge into an opportunity, mother, because you never became bitter despite everything, because you honored father not with tears but with actions." "Your father," Clara sighed. "I still think about him every day, you know, about the brief months we had, about how he saw me when no one else did, about how he taught me not just about land and contracts, but about my own worth. He loved you deeply, Gabriel said. The letters make that very clear. And you loved him back in the only way time allowed. Clara looked at her son, at the young man who carried the best of both his parents. You look so much like him, you know, not just physically, but in the way you think about justice, about responsibility, about using privilege to help others. I learned from you both, from him through your stories and letters, from you through daily example. Gabriel hesitated. Mother, can I ask you something I've always wondered? Of course. Are you happy, truly happy? I know you have the farm, you have purpose, you have respect, but are you happy? Clara thought deeply before answering. Happiness isn't what we imagine when we're young, Gabriel. It's not the absence of pain or loss. It's waking up knowing your life matters. It's looking back without crushing regret. It's seeing a son who has become a better man than you dreamed. It's knowing you've honored those who have gone through how you've lived. She took his hand. Yes, Gabriel, I am happy. Not in the simple way of fairy tales, but in a deep way, built on a solid foundation of work, love, loss, and rebuilding. I am happy. They watched the sunset together. Then Gabriel spoke. I have news to tell you. I met someone in the capital, Laura, a professor's daughter studying medicine. Intelligent, compassionate, with revolutionary ideas about public health. Clara's heart leaped. And I'd like her to come visit. If you approve, of course. But Mother, he looked at her seriously, I want you to know, when I get married, if I get married, it will be for true love. No agreements, no convenience. I learned that from you and Father. I learned that even in the strangest beginnings, love needs to be real. Clara laughed, tears of joy in her eyes. I can't wait to meet her. That night, alone in her room, Clara opened the last of the notebooks where she had recorded the farm's life. There were 16 volumes now, 20 years of meticulously documented history. She picked up the pen and began to write what would be the last entry in this volume. 20 years. 20 years since Dom Augusto Valente made me a proposal that changed everything. 20 years since I accepted out of desperation and discovered that sometimes the most crooked paths lead to the truest destinies. Gabriel is in love. My son, who grew up hearing about the strange and deep love of his parents, now seeks to build his own love, this time born of free choice and an open heart. I look back and see the 20-year-old girl I was, a frightened seamstress accepting the unthinkable. I look in the mirror and see the 40-year-old woman I've become, a respected administrator who helped transform not just a property, but an entire community. Augusto, wherever you are, you planted seeds that continue to blossom. Your son is a man of principle, exactly as you dreamed. Your lands prosper not just in wheat, but in justice. And I, the seamstress you saw when no one else did, learned that dignity comes not from where we are born, but from how we live. Mercedes, dear aunt, you were right. I surpassed all your dreams, but only because you gave me the foundation of love and education that made it all possible. Life doesn't give us what we deserve. It gives us what it gives, and it's up to us to decide what to do with it. I chose to turn an agreement into love, humiliation into dignity, desperation into purpose. And in the end, these choices made all the difference. Clara closed the notebook, placed it carefully on the shelf next to the other 15 volumes. She walked to the window, looked out at the moonlit valley. From somewhere distant came the sound of a guitar and laughter, the workers celebrating something in the communal house she had built years ago. The sound of life being lived, of simple, genuine joy. Clara smiled, placed a hand over her chest where her heart beat strong and steady. I lived well, she thought. I loved well. I honored the dead and prepared the living, and now I can rest knowing the legacy continues, not in gold or land, but in values, principles, and love that will cross generations. The night breeze brought the scent of lavender from the garden, the same scent that permeated her first memories in Olintos. Clara closed her eyes and allowed herself to feel everything, the gratitude, the longing, the pride, the peace. In the cemetery on the hill, the white flowers Gabriel had left that afternoon were already beginning to close with the night, and under the earth, two bodies rested side by side, Dom Augusto Valente and Mercedes, guarding the secrets of lives lived with purpose. And in the big house, a 40-year-old woman, who had been a seamstress and had become the mistress not only of lands but of her own destiny, finally allowed herself to believe what she had always doubted. She was enough. She always had been.